First I'll fit this bracket in place. Now this bracket is a one that I've made up, and it's Kodak had a nice fancy professional looking bracket that did exactly this job. Of course I don't have one, and I can make do with this little bracket, and it's just to hold the tail on this spring here in position. I noticed that that tail on that spring's a funny shape on this camera, which suggests that someone was fighting with it to try and get it into place. Now the cam here, this transfer shaft cam, I've already mentioned that the adjustment screw here was wound right out of the limit of its travel. That's very unusual. It means that really the cam was probably a tooth out in terms of synchronization. It certainly worked after a fashion for them possibly, but it was not ideal. So I've just looked at the state of this, and it all appears quite good. There's a fair bit of wear marks showing on the cam here, nothing dramatic. So I'll lubricate this with a bit of molybdenum and then fit that into the body. And I've also got to fit into place this fine spring which goes on here, and it's very easily dislodged, so I've left that to fairly late in the piece because I'm sick of that thing. That spring is very prone to flying off and disappearing at some inopportune moment. That's sitting correctly in place, that's good. Now, I'll take this chance to put a tiny smear of molybdenum paste on each of the 3 posts down here that the control arms for the mirror and capping plate run on, and they just needed a touch. They were running fine. And some molybdenum paste on the transfer shaft cam here, on those surfaces that the control arms run on. And this piece here, this front gear, has a little cam on it too, and it's important that that gets a little bit of lubricant so that it works well. I'm just running some molybdenum through the centre. I'll put my cam in place and see if I can get it in correctly. This of course couples to the cocking rack at the back of the camera. Just trying to get it seated. It's seated correctly now. It's sitting at the correct angle. I'm happy with that. Got my cam in place, the front transfer cam. Now I've got to fight that spring around. Now it needs to come round another full turn. It's just at the start position now. I need to come around another full turn from there. And of course it's quite a strong spring and it's doing its best to get away. That's sitting in position there now. That's good. It's almost pulled that shaft completely out of line, but it is sitting in the correct position. Alright, I'm just having a quick regroup to make sure I know what I'm up to here. I can pop my washers in place. I'll put them in the correct way round this time, unlike the last person in. That's it. That body is now ready to have the shutter assembly fitted into place. So that's my next task. The shutter assembly needs to be stripped down. We know it works after a fashion, but it's quite sticky. Certainly needs to come to bits and be cleaned. Those two components will probably need to go right through the degreaser. They couple the setting rings to the meter. There's a lot of that thick grease on the front face there. That certainly needs to go. At the back, what do I see? Well, you can see someone's been very free with the adhesive when they put that insulating washer back in place. They were free with the adhesive, but they didn't bother to clean the grease off first, so the adhesive didn't stick very well. Get rid of that crap. I've got to unsolder this wire. That's the flash sync wire. And we'll strip all these other components off. Oh, that screw's loose. That's a bad one to be loose. Let's take that off. This arm does a couple of jobs, but one of the jobs it does is it couples and uncouples the flash sync so that the flash is only armed and fired when the shutter fires and not just in between when the blades are open for viewing. I can't quite get that loose from under that arm, so I'll just slacken that screw off, give me a little bit more room. That's good. There's a little plastic insulator on the end of this arm and it's flapping around loose, so I'm going to put a spot of glue on that before that goes back. This bracket here stops that arm from being able to move beyond its normal range. I'll just lock that screw back down. That little gear was on back to front. One side is relieved by the teeth, and that was on the wrong way round. So I'm just checking the position of my cam here and the teeth. Make sure that's all in the correct position. This cam is a little bit suspect because we've already found bodged things going on, missing screws. First tooth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that is back at against the post. That's all good. I know what I'm doing. This little rack looks a little bit rough at that spot, but I'll check that, make sure that's not rough before we put it back together. It may be fine, it might just be like a very shallow scratch mark. It might not amount to much at all. Lift off that drive gear. Why is that reluctant to move? It's very unusual. That is odd. It's not normally a fight. Probably means the end of that shaft is a bit rough, a bit out of shape. If somebody'd been using a pair of pliers to cock the shutter with that arm, which is quite possible during the testing process, they may well have damaged the shape of that slightly. Now there's a washer missing here. There should have been a small washer under there. It's not present. Lift off this cam. Likewise, there should have been a washer here. It doesn't look like there is one. I think that's just the casting I'm seeing there. So we're short 2 washers. So whoever was servicing this was somewhat clumsy. Four screws hold the shutter body to this mount. So I'll loosen those screws off, then I'll unsolder that wire, remove the shutter from this front mount. And we can clean up the front mount and then start working on the shutter proper and then reassemble things. You can see here there's all glue and rubbish on here that's flowed down when somebody glued the leatherettes back on the front of the camera. Here's 2 little felt pads. They're not supposed to be black. They were just nice yellow felt pads. They've got into that state because someone's allowed them to get covered in grease and dirt. Again, during a repair process. I'll unsolder that wire and be back. Alright, I've unsoldered that wire. So now we should be able to remove the shutter from the front housing. I'll pop the shutter aside for a second. I'm looking at this front housing. It's a bit dirty. That's of course fairly normal. This is possibly a dirtier example than most, but not by a great deal. I want to get rid of that terrible dried glue there. Mostly because I'm worried about fragments of that glue coming off at a later date and clogging up the mechanism. Not just because it's an unsightly mess, which it certainly is. That was the insulating washer. That's a board of some sort, some insulating board. It may be very compressed paper or something. It's nothing too fancy. Now the flash contact down at this point, these are very fragile. You can possibly see, if I hold that right, you can possibly see that there's just a tiny thin bridge of plastic holding the contact on at that point. That's prone to failure. This is already an ugly shape down there. I don't know what's happened there. I think somebody's melted that when they've gone to solder a connection onto that. So what I normally do with this is this little void at this point, I fill that up with araldite. And that effectively supports the contacts at this point and here, still leaves them flexible at this point so that they're not being overly stressed and aren't likely to break. But it stops this thing here because this plastic piece, they're very brittle. There's every likelihood that will break and then the flash won't work properly. So I'll fill this little void up here with some 5-minute araldite. Apart from that, what have I got to do? Just clean things really. I'm going to remove this arm. This is the shutter release. It couples from the shutter release, comes down in inside the top of the body and hits on it here. And it transfers the action to this lever. And that lever transfers it to the shutter itself. and it is not enthusiastic to come undone. There is a little return spring here. I'll pop that carefully to one side so we don't lose it. I've got to scrape off all this excess glue and rubbish that's under this edge here. That all really needs to come off. And basically I've just got to physically clean these components, get all the rubbish off it, make sure that this lever pivots smoothly. Drop a 5-minute Aerolite down there at that point. I'll clean up all this front cover because it's a bit of a mess, and then I can get back to doing the shutter itself. So most of my time is going to be spent cleaning and doing boring stuff, nothing exciting. Since I'm going to strip this off, I do need to remove these pieces of leatherette. It's the only time you do. So you can tell someone's had these off because it's got the same horrible bloody brown adhesive stuck under there. They don't need to come off for usual shutter servicing. It's only because I'm trying to get some of this absolute filth off here that I'm doing it. So one screw here, one screw there, one screw here. It lifts off. That piece there I'll put through the ultrasonic cleaner, get that chrome properly cleaned up. This actually moves very smoothly. That's what that couples to our meter setting dial. That has certainly had no part to play in the stiffness of the meter setting. That was all to do with the control rings for the front of the shutter. I'll clean all this rubbish off, and look at that, that's all glue there, of course, that's all the old adhesive. And there may be multiple layers of different adhesives have been used here. That's certainly not the original adhesive. And whoever put it on there was very, very generous. They can't have been paying for the adhesive. It must have been the boss paying for that. There's just so much of it. I want a clean surface so that the leatherettes will fit back smoothly. And I want all the excess off the side here so that the camera actually fits back together correctly too. It's difficult to get your leatherette fitted around this flash contact easily. It's the leatherettes, of course, have usually shrunken over time, so they're reluctant to fit over that boss anyway. That's 99 times out of 100 there'll be a break in the leatherette at this point, but of course it's invisible, so it won't cause you any bother. Because it's so hard to get the leatherette fitted back firmly at that point, it's not uncommon. Well, in this case there's a lot of adhesive heaped up there because the leatherette was never pushed back against the body. Every time I think I've come to the end of it, I see some more. And of course I've got a leatherette strip which goes around the front panel here either side. They were loose and hanging off, and I just lifted them away before we took the front off the camera, I think. So there's the remains of some adhesive here, and just dirt and filth really. That's looking a little bit more promising. Let's have a go at that with some naphtha on a cotton bud. See if we can improve this. I'm just interested mostly here in lifting off any oil or grease or dust or grit, anything loose really. I can see there wasn't much lubrication in around that cam. I don't put much there. I certainly don't assemble it dry. I usually use molybdenum paste as to lubricate those surfaces, make sure that they run smoothly over each other. But I don't lard them up with graphite grease either. But some repairers love their graphite grease and they butter everything with it. That looks a lot happier. I'll go and find my 5-minute Araldite, I think, and put a drop in there. Let's do the outside of this front panel. It doesn't have to be perfect because most of this, of course, is hidden by leatherettes or chrome trim or behind the shutter. I just want to get all the loose filth off here. If it wasn't for the painted surfaces that we're trying to preserve, it would be easiest to put this in the ultrasonic cleaner and just give it a birthday that way. But ultrasonic cleaners are very good at removing paint when you don't want them to. If you do want them to, of course, they won't touch it. That looks good. Right, some 5-minute erudite, which I'll just put a blob in there, and this can go through the ultrasonic cleaner to get it looking a bit prettier. 2 strips of leatherette that go either side of the front. I'll clean those. They can go back in place once that front piece is back in place. Add 2 little triangular patches. One of them was already damaged, so I'll find a replacement for that one. The other one can probably go back okay, and we'll put the shutter release arm itself back on there. That needs to be cleaned, and I'll just lubricate that with a slight touch of molybdenum paste. Right, so I'm away to clean this. I'll see you later. Alright, well, that looks a lot prettier. Put that back in place. Single chrome screw at the centre here. And I'll put the shutter release can go back on there. We'll clean that up and put that in place. I've got the erudite down in there by that flash contact to get that held back correctly. Yeah, where's my lever? That's very, very greasy. That's probably graphite grease, that one. They've been a bit free with it. We don't need it. The problem with putting too much grease on stuff is that grease is great for attracting and holding grit and dust, which is yeah, might be useful, and sometimes it helps keep it away from other things, but it just becomes a grinding paste with dust and grit trapped in it. So those screws are quite dirty. Okay, so what do I want to do? I want to take a little bit of molybdenum paste and just rub that front surface very lightly and in the holes that the screws run through. And that should be sufficient. Our spring. We have our return spring, and it was this one. Let's make sure that body is cleaned off completely. I'm pretty sure it is. That's good. Put our spring in position. Sits just in the body there. Slide our shutter release in place. Yes, that's good. Making sure it didn't dislodge the spring. Of course, I put it right down on top of the screws so I can't find them. check the action. That's nice and smooth, and it's good. Now I think I can glue back the leatherette patches either side at the top and the two strips that run down the side here. If I find the glue. Since these are smaller pieces, I won't apply the adhesive directly to the leatherette. I'll apply it with a toothpick. So I'll pop some down on the paper. These two strips had not been re-glued earlier, so they only had the original adhesive on them, and that had given up the ghost. It's our first piece. I've been a bit generous with that adhesive. That's what I accused other people of. Make sure that's tucked down neatly into that little crevice in the body, and I'll just run down that and rub off any excess. Yes, that looks good. Now the other side. Got to work faster than this. The adhesive is drying as I speak. Oh, yes, now I see my mistake last time. I didn't wipe the edges. That looks good, that's nice and tidy and it's not floating anymore. These two triangular patches. One of them is the original, one of them is a replacement. I wasn't able to get all the old adhesive off the back of that piece because the adhesive is too hard and the patch was likely to come apart. It's good and it's mate. It's not uncommon to find retina reflexes with these little patches missing because someone had taken them off the camera thinking that was the way to get in, and then discovering that it wasn't the way to get in. and not bothering to put them back afterwards. That looks good. Right, so our front panel's looking a lot tidier. That is ready to have the shutter serviced and put back into it now. So that is probably the next task, the shutter itself. What can I see here? Well, I can see a piece of heat shrink tubing on the flash contact there, so somebody has used that. That sort of dates it a bit because I don't know when heat shrink tubing became available. I have 3 screws hold this on and they are looking a bit ugly. So again, we've been hit by the bandit with the crappy screwdriver set. Those screw heads are unusually rough. Lift this off. Just checking the front piece here, front panel. There's a ball bearing there, that's the detent for the shutter speeds. This little pinion, I'm just making sure that that's not damaged. No, that all looks good. And I'll pop those pieces away here. This little cover plate on the front, it's got 2 unusual scratches on there. I don't know why someone would have put those there. And they may just have slipped with a tool while they were busy abusing something else on the camera, of course. That's quite dirty. It's got that thick, sticky grease on the front. That'll certainly need to be cleaned.